The focus of this lecture is to try to help you understand a little bit more what Augustine is doing in his Confessions and what it is that Augustine is focusing on, because you get this weird shift that happens once you get to book 10. So the first 9 books is giving you this kind of autobiography and focusing on Augustine's life, focusing on kind of his journey, if you will. And one of the ways I would think about that is the focus is on his misdirected loves. As he's trying to show you how his entire life has been one of kind of misdirection by focusing on the material and investing in the material that which can only be fulfilled by God. Now, one of the questions that I really want you to think about is Augustine as Platonic as he actually appears? Is Augustine kind of buying into the Platonic understanding of the material being evil and the spiritual being good, and how does that then jive with his understanding of Christianity? So it's important to ask that question and to see that at a certain point in the Confessions, Augustine is making an ascent, and so he's seeking truth. And so as you kind of see him move from the Manichaeist understanding of the world, which seems more black and white, there's a good God and a bad God and all of that, but then he has some questions. And then he kind of moves into this kind of Platonic understanding, and there's that one of the books where Augustine is focused on Platonism and realizing that the Platonist stuff is kind of opening him up. But then you reach another point where, specifically in the context of Ambrose, he is recognizing that Christianity is saying something different. So he talks, for example, in the book of the Platonists, and talks about what these books contain, but then keeps saying, okay, so in there I did find this, but these books do not contain. So on page 148, for example, says, I did tease out from various expressions and modes of thought in those books that the Son, since he had the form of the Father, considered it no usurpation to be held God's equal. Right? So Platonism doesn't have a problem with this idea of a Son being divine. But then it says, but these books do not contain. He emptied himself out into the nature of a slave, becoming like to a man. And in man's shape, he lowered himself, so obedient as to die by death on a cross. In other words, Augustine comes to this realization that the Platonist stuff only takes him so far. And while he is trying to ascend to the truth, right? So if you think of the hierarchy of a Platonic worldview, you ascend from the material to the kind of spiritual or the ideas. He comes to this realization that while he is trying to ascend, God is descending in Jesus Christ. And so is Augustine a Platonist? Well, yeah, he has to use kind of the Platonic language as the way to make sense of things. Yet, he comes to embrace the finite reality of this world because he realizes that God has become incarnate in Jesus Christ, that God is descending, God is becoming weak. Augustine is trying to find certainty, and God is becoming weak and becoming human. And this is the epiphany that he has. And this is what causes him to become a Christian. This is what causes him to have this conversion experience. And it's important for me to help you see Augustine is a smart dude, and he's wrestling with truth, and he's willing to reject things that he doesn't believe make sense of reality. And what Augustine realizes is that Christianity, it is a story of God's love for us in Jesus and how God saves us from our sin, absolutely. But it is also a story that is real, and it gives a good account of reality and truth. And this is what Augustine comes to see. Now, what about chapter 10? What about book 10? Well, it's important to realize that book 10 talks about memory, and it's important to go back to the Plotinus stuff, right? And this notion of the forms and the ideas, and what is it that we're doing when we remember. This is important for Augustine. So remember that this whole project is a self-reflection where he's seeking God. And when he's talking about the Platonic stuff, he's kind of looking out and saying, I looked at the sun and I looked at all of these things, and is this God? And no, these are created things. And so he begins to turn inward, and he begins to think about his memory, the memories, and asks a question about what is memory? What does it mean to remember? And it's here where he discovers God. So think about, if you would, just for a second, this Platonic distinction between the ideas and the forms, which are eternal, and then the material world, which exists in time. So when you remember something, okay, what you're doing is your mind is actually tapping into kind of this world of the forms or the ideas that exist. And what is time? Well, what Augustine is going to argue is that time is maybe not actually something out there. Maybe time isn't this kind of thing, but time is something that is internal that we impose upon the world. And it's impossible for us to see ourselves as whole beings because we're living within kind of a temporal existence. We live in an existence that moves from one moment to the other. We have a past and a present and a future, but we always live in the present. We're always in the now. But here's the thing Augustine comes to see. It is our past that gives us the content to be able to know anything and live in the now, right? So think about, I'm talking right now and you're hearing me. The only reason you're able to understand me, if you can understand me, is because of your past experience with words, where you remember meaning and you do it instantaneously. But you are living in some kind of memory. And what Augustine comes to see is that it's in that memory that as we think about ourselves and as we think about our own narrative, we give our lives time. So if I ask you, who are you? You're going to tell me a story, and you are going to narrate your life and pick these events and give time to your existence, right? And now we can't live all of those moments all at the same time, so we're living in kind of temporal time. But your ability to think back and remember, Augustine's question is, where are these things residing? Well, they're residing, right, in kind of our mind, and our mind then connects with the higher reality of the forms. So here's what he does. He's asking the question about, well, where is God? And what he realizes, and again, think of the Plotinus stuff, God resides deep within us. God resides inside of us, in our memory, that our memory becomes the link between our existence and God's existence. This is where God speaks to us. So his act of remembering in the Confessions, the first 9 books, he's seeking God through that whole process because it's in the act of memory that we find God. It's in memory where we get connected to the higher realm of the ideas and the forms. So here we see on this screen here, and I got the matrix stuff here, but because the matrix stuff kind of speaks to this, what Augustine realizes is that when we live within this temporal world, it's impossible for us to see ourselves as whole. Who are you? You don't even know because you haven't lived your life yet. We grow, we change, right? But God exists in the eternal. So God sees our life as a whole. So God knows you better than you know yourself. So the act of prayer in the Confessions is this realization that God is the one who knows us. And as we reflect upon our memory and as we narrate our lives, it is an act of prayer to God as our own identity is revealed through that act of memory. I hope this makes sense. I know it sounds kind of highfalutin and lots of high stuff here. But this is what Augustine is doing, and it's important to recognize. Here on this screen, I've got kind of the same things: relationship between the temporal and the eternal. And we're seeking after these things, we're desiring them, and the idea for Augustine is, in this temporal life we can never reach that point of rest, because we are never whole. Our identity is always fragmented. But God is calling us and drawing us and loving us to become who God knows that we are. Now, here's the thing that I think is important in Augustine. Augustine is Platonic in the sense that these categories are very much kind of grounded in the Plotinus worldview. However, Augustine, at the end of the day, comes to say we can only come to know ourselves by moving through the temporal, by living finite temporal lives. This is what Augustine is trying to say in the Confessions. And that last thing there where he says it's a struggle to be present to ourselves. This is the struggle we all have. Who are we? We feel this innate kind of desire, and there's something about life that we feel like we should be doing, and we feel drawn into these things. And this is what Augustine is saying is this thing gnawing at our own lives, right? That there's an incompleteness in this temporality. And the only way to embrace that and work through that is in relationship to God, where our lives then become rightly ordered. And that is the important thing. Augustine is not opposed to sex and pairs and games and all of these different things. In other words, the finite temporal life is good, but we have to be rightly directed. Friendship is good, but it's only good when it's in God. Marriage and sex is good, but it's only good when it's in God. So the temporal life, and this is the beauty of Augustine, is there's an embrace of the temporal life here when it's lived in relationship to God and the identity that God is calling us to be. So then how do we make sense of the creation stuff at the end? Well, as you read it, think more about his interpretation of the creation account is really this recognition that the creation of Genesis 1 is not just about the creation of the cosmos. It is. But it's also about the creation of you. That your life is a creation account. That God is at work creating you, bringing you from darkness and chaos into the rest of order and Sabbath. So he's an ancient Christian, and he has more of a different way of interpreting the text than we do. For Augustine to take this kind of hyper literally, to be just about the creation of the cosmos, is to miss out on the most important part, that God is at work in Jesus Christ, claiming us and creating us. So why, in some ways, think of it this way. The introductory autobiographical part is an introduction into this time and creation piece, because Augustine wants us to come to the realization that he has just given you, that in the Confessions, he has given you his creation account. And now as you read the Confessions, you're supposed to be thinking about your own creation and who you are, and delve into your memory and think about how God is present and how you discover God in that narration of your own life. So as you write your papers, the reason why I'm asking you to write your own confessions is Augustine would say that if I make you read this book and then give you like a test or a paper where you tell me what Augustine says, that's missed the point. You read the Confessions not to learn more about Augustine, but to come to the realization that God is present in memory, and that by reflecting upon your own life and narrating your own life and the ways in which God is present, you begin to encounter God's voice, and God, in a sense, creates you. So I hope this makes sense. Then he talks about the Trinity, memory, understanding, and will. We're not going to delve into that as much, and we talked about the doctrine of the Trinity already. It's more important, I think, for you to understand what he's trying to do with memory and how the Confessions is speaking to the ways in which we encounter God and how God is at work creating us and creating our lives through this temporal life.